Well, beekeepers, it's time again for that short monthly support video that I make for my bee culture articles. This is the month for March 2020. Time flies. This time I've done the best I could do to describe a situation that happened right there behind my camera. First week in November, maybe, I brought in 5.5 deeps of old honey. Historically, I've saved honey in deep frames. I tend to use deeps more and more. I think that's not a smart thing to do, but I have them. It's too much trouble to cut them down, so I use deeps throughout. Rarely anything less. And I brought in 5.5 deeps or so and set them right there behind the camera, as I've already told you, and planned to extract that honey. Now you see those frames have been through about 2 seasons. Maybe a few frames have been through 3 seasons of being put back on the bees in winter, or being used in some cases to help packages get started or splits or whatever. I just kept this back to use it that way. It's always been hard to maintain. Honey just sitting around as an invitation to mice and small hive beetles and wax moths. But I've always been able to control it. I brought in those 5.5 deeps, and I had every plan to extract immediately. What a gruesome job that was going to be. They're embedded in the deep hive bodies. They're entombed in heavy, unbroken wax and propolis. The honey is dark. I wouldn't want to eat it. So I planned just to extract it, free up the combs, refurbish the combs if needed, get rid of some of the old dark comb. I had good intentions. Halloween came. I mean, what kind of holiday is Halloween for me, an old man? Well, if you got grandkids, 4 and 7 and a bit older, 6 all total, Halloween's kind of a big deal. So we knocked off and visited back and forth and cut pumpkins and did all that was required. I'll do that. I'll do that honey thing later. It's going to involve getting down the extractor, strapping it down, hot knives, getting wax all over the floor. I'm just going to do that later. November came. Had birthdays in my family. You want to hear all this? Thanksgiving? Well, Christmas was no better. So I just kept saying later, later, later. There was a nice smell. Well, it was nice. Of combs and wax and propolis and honey that sat there. And I promise you that as time passed, that smell changed. It was not horrible. It had an animal smell. But I noticed after sitting here for untold hours, that doesn't smell the way it used to. You don't suppose. So I popped off the top of the tightly contained supers, and there they were, full-blown wax moths. Set them outside. I went through all this in the article. It was freezing cold, killed the wax moths, warmed up, robbers came in like crazy, I got cold again, everything stopped, seemed to be under control. Then they just sat there. So they're still sitting there. I've talked to a friend who has an old type, large wax / granulated comb honey extractor. I think I'm going to use that to get myself out of this mess. And what I didn't mention in the article, because I just discussed too much gloom and doom, there's one right now on the window. Somewhere after those deeps have been outside for maybe 2 weeks, I'm getting hive beetles on my window. Here's 4 of them. There's one I can see right now. I have no idea where the hive beetles are coming from. There is one comb that got left out, me trying to see the wax moths. Of course, that brought in mice. So now I've got hive beetles in my shop. I don't know of any damage that they do. And I've got mice that won't take the bait on my trap. So it's just another Calamity Jim beekeeping adventure, but that got me started into wax moths. They're pretty common, and we don't want them. They're considered pests. They're only really pests because we put all these delightful frames together as food sources for them. Otherwise, it'd be hard-pressed to find much outside there, just a wild colony here and there. So we're the ones, as beekeepers, who support these big populations of wax moths. I got all into that and discussing the parameters with bees and wax moths, and it's tough out there for a bee. In a real way, it's tough out there for a wax moth. So I became intrigued by that relationship, and I found an article that said, hey, honeybees at this point in their evolutionary time routinely lose the wax moth war. That wax moths are free to go in, they're free to lay their eggs, eat their comb, and the bees can only respond to that. But apparently they have no way of preventing them from ever coming in. So it's always this give and take relationship with wax moths and honeybees that I discussed. And then I got all philosophical and said that it's like so many other things. That's not all honeybees are having to deal with. They've got the foul brood diseases, and I tried to list them all. They got small hive beetles, obviously, to deal with. So just wax moths is not the only thing they have to deal with. And they got to deal with us in our own way, trying to do good, but so often than not failing. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. The bees, whether or not they admit it, they do want us. They do need us. They just don't know it. Well, they don't know it because we're the ones who gave them varroa that they have no real defensive response against. And we're the ones who put out pesticides, and we're the ones who make bad management decisions. Boy, don't they have a lot stacked up against them just to survive. So I got all involved in a short bit. I had to get out because I've only got 2,000 words to contribute to you here. Got involved briefly in swarming because the only way they make up their species population is to swarm. And if they don't swarm more than just enough to replace the ones that died from whatever, then they also have to produce more swarms so they can actually increase as a successful species. So the point I wanted to make, I didn't do it, but I tried, is that bees, wax moths, and swarming, it's all more complicated. I'd get up and pick up a book, but I'd lose my focus point here. Those books will just break it down into delineations of how to winter bees, how to control swarming. But in reality, all of those behaviors, all of those management schemes are integrally related, making for a very complex interrelationship that we just reduce to a list of things we need to do to keep our bees healthy. And that list is far more complicated than that. I evolved from that into us. When I write this article, I never know exactly how to write it. Some of these people are brand new beekeepers. Some of them have been keeping bees longer than I have. So I don't know of any author who can write a comprehensive article that really fits all beekeepers. There is no typical beekeeper. I mean, we're all over the page. And what's typical today, right here, right now, with this camera equipment and my interest and my health, has been changing all through the 4, soon to be 5 decades that I've been keeping bees. So I'm not the beekeeper now that I was when I was young and energetic. So we all modify, we all change, but the bees are kind of locked in to a behavioral, instinctual scheme that has some evolutionarily adaptability, but it's required to occur over time. So we end up carrying a burden. We have to do the best we can, and oh, so often, doing the best we can, we end up not doing very good at all. In fact, we sometimes hurt the bees. I had to take a short break there because, of course, the landline phone rang. It rings 4 times a week, and it had to ring right now about a prescription of mine being ready at the CVS drug store. So back to where I was as much as possible. We've done this bee thing. We are bee related. We do the best we can, and we end up being atypical beekeepers doing with our bees what we enjoy, especially those of us who have done it for 15, 20, 25, 30 years. We really evolve, we really change, but the bees need us. I deeply appreciate you watching. I'm still trying to modify the article into something a bit more relevant and comparable to other modern day magazines and web pages and whatever. It's not particularly easy to do, but everything changes. So I should be trying to make typical adaptations too here. Be patient with me as I do that. I'll see you next time, I hope. Thanks for watching. I made a resolution months ago, a thing I rarely do, that I'm going to try to respond better to you who write me on my web pages and all these social media formats that we use. And that I'm not very good at. Just the time to get Facebook figured out, then it's time to learn Snapchat. So I just feel like a mouse on a treadmill. Thank you. We'll talk later. Bye-bye.